All right, so a general welcome again. I'd like to first acknowledge that Gender Equity in Media Society Vancouver operates on the ancestral, unceded, stolen, and occupied territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. On behalf of the GEM staff and board, I'd like to express our sincere gratitude to the Indigenous custodians of these lands and pay our respects to them and their ancestors. We are so grateful for the teachings provided by the custodians of these lands, the patience exercised by the Indigenous communities here, and for the opportunities they provide us to share and engage with their art, their culture, and as much as possible, their language. If you feel comfortable, I do invite you to introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know where you're coming from and what you do in film or in the industry if you are a film person. My name is Anaïsa Visser. I use she, they pronouns, and I'm the executive director at Gender Equity in Media Society Vancouver, or GEMS Vancouver, which is a member-based organization committed to advancing gender equity in film and television. You can support us by spreading the word about what we do, becoming a member, you can donate to us, you can attend our annual film festival in March, and you can participate in events like this to help spread the word about what we do. Thanks for being here. There will be an opportunity to ask questions closer to the end of this conversation. For now, I'm going to just quickly let you know that we are just so honored to host director, writer, producer, showrunner, and futurist Loretta Sarah Todd, and our moderator, Renae Morriseau, who's a writer, theater, television director, singer, and musician. I will pass it over to Renae now to get started and enjoy the chat.
Thank you. Thank you, Ananisa, for that. And thank you all for being here today. I'm really honored to be able to have a discussion with Loretta. And hopefully at the end of this, the last 15 minutes, you'll have some questions if you want to ask Loretta yourself. I'm honored to welcome Loretta Todd, an award-winning filmmaker, visionary storyteller, and leader in Indigenous media. Her work spans children's TV like Coyote Science, her acclaimed feature film, Monkey Beach, and the IM4 Lab, which supports Indigenous creators in XR and emerging tech. Today, we're going to explore her creative journey and the deeper cultural meanings of Indigenous storytelling, as well as the challenges and triumphs she faced along the way, but also what it means to be an Indigenous storyteller, reclaiming narrative, building community, and sharing a good future for the next generation. What we say in Cree is "Mayope Matisawin" for a good life, and a lot of times in our ceremonies we have that word. So if you've ever been into a Cree ceremony, you've probably heard "Mayope Matisawin" because many people speak about the good future and for the next generation that our prayers are for. So Loretta, I just have a few questions here, and I just wanted to just start since we talk about Coyote Science. And Coyote Science bridges Indigenous knowledge and Western science for children. How do you see this as a form of cultural reclamation and future building through storytelling?
Hi. Thank you so much, Renae, and thank you so much, Anissa and GEMS. There's some yard work going on outside, so I'm going to have to now talk louder so you can hear me. I also like to thank the grandmothers and grandfathers for bringing us here safely so we could share in this knowledge and time together. And just quickly, I also always like to say where I'm from. I'm originally from one of the original Red River Métis families, also St. Paul de Métis. My great-grandmother was from Whitefish Lake in Alberta, and my great-grandfather was from North Dakota, Chippewa, and on my mother's side, Scottish. And we also have some Irish from the Todd, the William Todd, the original William Todd, who went to the Red River. And so why? Well, you know, it's funny, I was thinking about this because I can give you all kinds of intellectual and academic reasons for Indigenous science and Western science and their equivalency, because that I had to do that in order to get funding and, do proposals and, make sure I, checked and double checked and did all my fact checking with respect to science. But in some ways it might have started in a very simple way when I was a kid. There's a picture of me leaning over, petting one of those little caterpillars, those black and orange caterpillars that you particularly see a lot on the prairies that kind of look furry and cute and everything else. So I did that. But then there was another time, the story goes, and I vaguely remember this, where I thought I saw the same little caterpillar on the ground and I went to pet it, but actually it was a bee and it stung me. And so to me, that kind of is at the essence of science. Science is about observation. So whether it's Western science or Indigenous science, it's basically observing nature and learning from it, observing the world around us and learning from it. And I think that was something that they also, when you're doing Indigenous, or when you're doing educational television or educational curriculum, anything, when, research shows that if people see themselves in in what's being taught, then they're more likely to feel good about it and want to learn. And one of the reasons why I started Coyote Science is because now this has changed, but it's been what? How long have I been doing Coyote Science? About oh, sorry. I've been doing Coyote Science now. We did 3 seasons. We did our last season last year. It was launched. But so it's been, it was over 10 years. Um, one of the things was when I started to develop it, our kids weren't necessarily going on to graduate from high school. And one of the reasons our kids weren't graduating from high school is not because we're not smart, not because we're not, capable. It's because often science and math. It was because of science and math classes that our kids weren't taking. And when you don't take those classes, you can't graduate from high school because you have to have math 11, I think, and that. And so we're not being seen in those classes. So what was really important for me is to let our kids see themselves right from, the young ages doing science and being scientists from an Indigenous perspective. So to me, that was really critical for our future because those kids need to be able to get through their high school, get into university, to be able to study science, but more importantly, to bring Indigenous science to those places. I think that Western science is very much the scientific method. Often Western science will say, oh, but you really don't have science because you don't have the scientific method. And the scientific method basically says, you can experiment and you can have a hypothesis and then you can repeat, you can examine the results and you can repeat and refine. And I don't see how that's, much different from the little kid touching the bumblebee and realizing, oh, I've tested this now and I know not to touch the bumblebee. I mean, I'm making it more simplistic than it is. But basically, Indigenous science is based on generations of close observation. It's based on understanding weather patterns, animal behavior, repeatable, observable phenomena. And the results of it are amazing. Like the results of Indigenous science are amazing. And the Incans built millions of roads. They built aqueducts that, serviced, over what would so much of what we call now South America. My people, your people, Renae, we built these incredible birch bark canoes that were, I just want to kind of like quickly, I'm going to refer to my notes here, that were some of the best, water going, vehicles, really vehicle, I guess, transportation in the world. And it wasn't just because we were just, intuitive. It wasn't just because, that might work or that, well, somehow we're going to do this. It was because, again, it was based on knowledge. It was based on science. It was based on observation. It was based on, and there's my brother who's a kind of an amateur boat builder who hasn't built a birch bark canoe, but could if he had to, says that there's a math equation about that basically is an equation that sort of says how the boat or the canoe will move through the water. And he says, maybe we didn't know that equation, but we did know that equation because how else could we have built, canoes in that way? So what was really, really important for me is to first of all, empower our kids, make our kids feel good about themselves, let them see themselves as scientists, let them see themselves that, physics and engineering and chemistry, all those things are part of our culture as well, and that they can excel. They could excel in regular school system with that knowledge and with bringing their knowledge. But maybe more importantly is that I think the world needs Indigenous science, because Indigenous science also brings place, story, and an understanding of energy and our values of love and kindness. So you can't do anything to the earth with the earth without honoring the earth and respecting the earth and bringing love and kindness to it. So right now, we hear about, oh, we got to get these energy things going because, oh, Trump is, he's destroying the world, and gee, we got to build more pipelines because, oh, we got to get that energy out of the ground. The first thought should be, no, what's the kindest thing to do? What's the most loving thing to do? And maybe there's another way. Maybe we don't need those pipelines. Maybe there's another way. And those are the things, discussions that haven't been brought in. And I think Indigenous scientists and Indigenous people need to bring that in. And our young people and our old people, because our old people have that knowledge too. It's not like, oh, well, we got to wait for the young people to get through university to do that. It's like right now, the world needs Indigenous science. And so that's kind of been some of the reasons why I've been, was so keen to make Coyote Science.
I think that, the interesting thing that I'm getting from what you're saying is that built within our cultural worldviews, we have these constructs ceremonially, relationality, that is sort of a relational accountability that's built within our structures and built within our laws. As a filmmaker, I'm just curious about how do you represent that? I mean, you've described that a bit about with Coyote Science and the integrity that you had to put into that and the academic reality of what science is. But in terms of relational accountability, you've done some, as you founded the IM4 Lab to support Indigenous creators in immersive media. How does that initiative connect to this idea of relational accountability and our Indigenous ways of seeing and making and, the imaging of the world that we live in? What is that for you in terms of why you created IM4 Lab?
Well, I'm going to just back up a little bit again to kind of before I go into IM4 Lab. It's just like that sort of like just when we think about creating, like all the people who do the great artwork of our many nations, they're not just sort of like saying, okay, I'm going to put this line, carve this line in here, or I'm going to put that bead next to that, or that porcupine thing next to that because, oh, it looks cool. Although they might be doing it because it looks cool, but they're doing it because there's a story to tell. And that within that story, there's a teaching, and that also within that teaching is something about our relationship to place. So I think that, those are all sort of factors that go into Indigenous science. So when I think about my work, I think about, how can I formally, as a filmmaker or as a human being, but as a filmmaker, how can I formally bring in some of those values in terms of the very structure of my work? So my early documentaries that I made, for instance, with the National Film Board or whatever, like Forgotten Warriors or, The Learning Path or whatever, I always try to start with an honor song because, often when we're telling someone's story or we're trying to represent a story or represent the people in the story, we're really honoring them. And so in a way, putting an honoring song at the beginning of the film was my way of sort of starting my films. Often in documentaries, you have a thesis and then you go to prove your thesis. And that's the old documentary style documentary. But for me, it was like, no, I'm starting with an honoring. And then from there, the story will sort of unfold. So in a way, I think it's like that's our role. You know, I mentioned some of my ancestors. So in a way, it's up to us to honor them and to honor that knowledge and to bring it forward and, you know, let it inform what we do and then share it with others. So with the IM4 lab, you know, back in the day, and you know, some people may have heard me talk about this already. Back in the day when we were starting out, after I went to film school, we were this little sort of fledgling Indigenous film community across Canada, and Renae, I remember some of those days back in the 90s. And we had these Indigenous, you know, film organizations, and there was a point at which somebody at the BAMP Center said to me, "Hey, Loretta, why don't you come and do a residency?" And maybe sometimes I go too far and not give myself enough opportunity to take just for myself, but that's another story. But nonetheless, what I did was I said, no, this is not about me. Why don't we bring together all these Native creators who could potentially talk about how could we intervene into the BAM Center? How can we create an Indigenous space into the BAM Center? And so we did that. We had this gathering, and that eventually led to what is now, well, there was the Aboriginal Arts Center, and then it became Indigenous Media Center, I think, at BAMS. I mean, I'm long not involved in it, and I was only one of many who helped organize it. But one of the things that we started talking about then was technology, because as filmmakers, that's what we do. We use technology, and there were these new technologies coming in, and one of them was virtual reality. And plus there was what was then called cyberspace, which was just because of the beginning of the internet. And what was our role? Like, what does this mean to us as creators, as storytellers? What does this mean to us as, you know, future ancestors, if you like? You know, what does it mean to us who have to, you know, protect our knowledge and our land and our people? What does this technology mean? So we had a gathering we called From Drum Beats to Drum Bites. And we had sort of different kind of discussions. And Lawrence Paul, the artist, did a VR at the time, at that same time, which I wrote sort of an essay about. And he talked about, you know, the reasons why, how he made the VR he made. And he talked about he was going to use natural law. You know, you weren't going to be able to fly in his VR. You're going to have to go through the door and walk on the ground. You know, that made, you know, other VR artists have done otherwise. But anyways, that was the discussion. And we even had a panel with Leroy Little Bear and the late Hasu, where we talked about, you know, what's our relationship to these virtual spaces? How do we navigate these things? And I remember Leroy Little Bear saying, you know, this is not new to us. All this sort of all this kind of conceptualizing of being in these virtual spaces, all this kind of you know, being interconnected beyond just our physical isn't new to us. That's part of our culture. That's ceremony. That's who we are. Our understanding of ourselves as energy, as spiritual beings, formed from energy, and you know, all our relations, how we're related to everything, not only on this earth but also beyond this earth, and how, to quote Vine Deloria, the great Indigenous thinker, who's talked about how we have a personal relationship with the universe. So Leroy was talking about these things, and he said, you know, virtual reality is like old hat to us. Like, you know, you can just go out on the land, and you can basically, I don't think this is the word he used, but transcend the physical. And but it was interesting too, because the way, and now we see what's happened, the kind of dominance at that meeting, that particular meeting was called Cybercom 4. They were talking about, you know, escaping the body, this idea that, you know, they could be bigger than human. They could be into these spaces and they could become like superhumans. Or as one woman put it, it was also a place for the bachelor space, where, you know, men who weren't comfortable being with themselves, and then into kind of interrelationships with women, for instance, could go into these spaces. And now we see that now it's called incels, you know. And so and we see that sort of dominance of being able to, like, we have, you know, the Musks in the world wanting to kind of like become, you know, a few people become superheroes. And so anyways, so fast forward so then, you know, VR was too expensive. It was beyond our means. You know, we couldn't really do it. You know, I got, you know, busy with my own films, that kind of organization, you know, was no longer active, although we had a lot of like great meetings and discussions. So fast forward, and about 19, when Canada was, so-called Canada was celebrating its so-called birthday, and they were doing these, they had commissioned, the National Film Board, and, you know, bless their heart, and a few other organizations would commission these VRs by Indigenous artists to look forward into the future. And I applaud them. They were all amazing work, and, you know, congratulations to the artists. But I thought, you know, this is technology that goes, that, you know, to go back to Leroy's observation, this is something, this is no old news to us. This, we already can exist. We already exist within this conceptualizing of these spaces. So there's that. But there's also the other thing, and people have probably heard me say this before too, that when I got out of film school, I was told, oh, no, you're not ready for that. Oh, no, you can't do that. You know, my fellow film students that I went to school with, who were white, you know, who got the jobs and who didn't have someone say, no, you're not trained enough, or you're not ready enough, or you got to know more, or you wouldn't have authority. How could a Native woman have authority on set? I was actually told that. So, you know, of course, I was lucky. I still made films. I kind of persevered. But I thought, here's these new technologies. And I don't want to happen to people, to these technologies that happened to me when I got out of film school, with people saying, no, you can't do that. Oh, you're not ready for that. Oh, that's beyond you. You're not capable of it, or you have to learn more. So I wanted to make a center where people could learn all these technologies, Unity, Unreal, you know, we haven't done Blender yet, but we will, you know, creating spaces within virtual reality, you know, all the learning AR, all the kinds of things that are sort of part of this new creative technologies, that we would be there at the beginning, and that in order to access these technologies, that they would be free and inclusive. So anybody who wanted to show up from our communities who were interested in these things, they didn't have to have a degree, they didn't have to have a background in even computers. They just had to have a motivation to want to learn these technologies. And they could show up, and if it was for them, it was for them. If it wasn't, that's okay. And then if it was for them, they could move on. And or if they were filmmakers, they could say, hey, I'd like to learn these things so I can apply it for my own practice. And so we've done over about 5-6 years now, I guess. We've done probably over 50 workshops, and we've probably brought in about over, I would say, 1,000 participants in those workshops. And you know, we've got a series of new ones coming up. We've also commissioned AR, we commissioned VR. And again, because I didn't want anybody to say that to our people. And also I wanted us to be there at the beginning as those technologies evolve, so that our values could be in there. Because as you know, things like AI, and well, we don't even have to get into AI, just all these technologies have a great deal of impact on the earth because of the energy that's required. They have a great deal of impact on the earth because of what has to be mined to be able to produce those things. You know, so there's all kinds of, and where does also that mining have? Well, it comes from Indigenous lands. So those are all things that have to be factored in. I don't know if we've had as much of that influence on sort of, you know, making the industry be observant of those things, although I think that discussion is becoming more general, not just within Indigenous futurisms, it's also within, you know, Afro-American Indigenous futurisms, and just people in general in that industry saying, hey, you know, there's a big impact on what we're doing. So the idea is that we have to be here. You know, it is also the way of the future. And then it comes back to love again, you know, because, you know, I think some of you may remember a few years ago, there was a video game out where people were shooting Indians. I think it was called Red. I can't remember, someone might remember the name of it. And it was, you know, it was very much it was kind of, you know, I know Castle Wolfencraft, you know, Rosenstein, or whatever that early video game was killing Nazis. So, I mean, you know, although Nazis are, you know, we don't want Nazis in this world, you know, but I mean, video games kill people. So we know that, right? Shooter games, they kill people. But it was a very racist game. And, you know, so people spoke up and, you know, sort of changed that. But I mean, but so there's that. But again, it comes down to how can we influence those spaces, those technologies, the way they're used, how they're developed, who's there, whose stories are being told, and how we can, again, bring those principles of love. And I also like to say kindness, because that's a very fundamental principle of Cree culture is kindness. So yeah, that's kind of basically, you know, the background to IM4 Lab. Also, I think because I'm kind of this kind of amateur techie science nerd who isn't very doesn't have a lot of time, haven't given myself a lot of time to do the hands-on experiential learning of those technologies that I'm really, you know, developing projects, you know, raising funds to give other people the opportunities. So I can't say that, you know, I could sit down and program myself something in Unreal one day, but I still think that we've created I think another to speak to your point, Renae, we've created this incredible community, and I think that community is growing. And it's, I think the other thing that we really like about it is that we've created a safe place for people where there's like we try as best possible, you know, in 3 ways when you're learning. It's often this kind of this sort of thing you have to navigate. We don't tell people what to do or what to think. And so it's like with science and with technology, there's quite a bit of precision in the process. But we like to think we've given this really, we try to create this really safe, nurturing space where people can feel like they can experiment, so they can try things, they can see themselves, you know, taking what really is, I always say, it's not rocket science. It's still, you know, it's still just numbers. It's still just, you know, Unreal, as complicated as it might be. There's still simple programming. There's simple click and, you know, draw and paste. I mean, you know, there are all things that we do already in our lives with technology. So we might as well just take it to the next level.
Explain to me, what does the IM4 represent? What's behind the name of IM4?
Well, that was the other thing, is I didn't want to have just another society with presidents, vice presidents, and so on. So it has, it's IM4 is, of course, because of 4 directions. That's sort of, you know, key to many Indigenous cultures, and the Cree, you know, I'm Métis, my Métis-ness is Cree, is the Niawa means basically people of the 4 directions, or people of the 4 winds. I've heard both. It's actually the number of like Beyak, Niso, Nisto, Neo, like, you know, counting in Cree. So that was part of it. But the other part of it was the I reached out to 3, actually 4 amazing women, and Tacey Kimbono, C. Swice, Dewey Manuel, and Amethyst First Writer, so that they could become what I decided I think would be a better term, we called matriarchs, who could guide us and help us sort of steer the IM4 Lab. And I did it also because of each of those 4 women. Amethyst, eventually, because she's in Alberta, said that it was hard for her to kind of participate as much, although she was very much there at the beginning and helped us a lot. Is that they all, I had to go back to reciprocity, another Indigenous value, so kind of practice that in my life. So Tracy Kimbono's family, Doreen Manuel's family, MC Swice family, and Amethyst and her husband have all been important in my personal development and my filmmaking, storytelling development. So in a way, it was an act of reciprocity. Plus, as well, it was an acknowledgement of those women because they've given so much themselves to building community and creating opportunities for others within the you know, technology communities, filmmaking communities. So it was an opportunity to kind of recognize that. it was also an opportunity to give them the opportunity to learn these technologies so that they themselves could take them back to their community and they can, make the circle bigger. So it means I am for Indigenous media, for Indigenous matriarchs, for it's like there's different ways of seeing it.
Just go back here. I guess the just to finish off with this thing is that you have your view and you talked about Indigenous communities and finding the balance between the cultural protocols and the making of work that you're doing with creative freedom. And just with that kind of idea, just maybe talk a bit about your feature film Monkey Beach, supernatural and the everyday coexistent. How does this film reflect Indigenous cosmology and your relationship with ancestors, land, and spirit?
Well, it's always a little awkward because that film was based on a book written by Eden Robinson, which is based on her life and experience growing up as a Haisla and Nuak woman. I think it was a Haisla in Kitimat. So I'm not that, and so I think that's always a little bit of that's something. But I guess from the very beginning, when someone said to me, you should option that book, and that goes way back because it took me a long time to bring that film to screen. Someone said to me, you should option that book. And I said, why? And they said, because her writing is like your filmmaking. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. So I went out and got the book and I thought, oh yeah, it does. It does. It has it's kind of, it's elliptical. It's kind of lyrical. It sort of, it layers both the physical, the real with the supernatural, if you like, or that there's always a spirit, that there's a spirit, that there's energy. It's energy that's beyond our physical knowledge, even if you like. And so I thought, yeah, that's interesting. Plus, even though I didn't have the life of Lisa or those characters per se, but there were similarities in that, my life was, I left home when I was 13. I hitchhiked across Canada. I did all these things that were very dangerous to someone. And I had, the experience of, although it's interesting for me, was like when I did run to Vancouver, I remember someone said, let's go down to Hastings, Maine and roll drunks. And I didn't really know what that meant. All I remembered was that my dear father, and I love him dearly, but I know he struggled with with drinking. And I remember sometimes he would come home and he would say, he'd be beat up. And my mom would say, oh, you got rolled again. And that meant also that there was no money. So, so I didn't want to go roll drunks there because I knew that that wasn't a safe thing to do. And I didn't want to do that sort of thing. So in a way, that meant I wasn't going to stay still. I wasn't going to go to one place and stay there. I was going to move all over the place. And that way I was maybe I thought I was less of a target because if I keep moving, then no one can get me. And so, whereas in Monkey Beach, she does go to Vancouver and she does, kind of encounter the tougher parts of the city. But I still felt there was, sort of a connection that way. And I also, I guess I felt the fact that I always thought that, well, I think this is kind of, and maybe this is universal, but certainly it's within the Indigenous community, is that we all have medicine. We all have a gift, if you like. We all have a medicine. And in her case, her medicine was the fact that she could coexist with beings beyond the physical, and that she could see those who had died, and she could but she didn't want that power. It was a very painful power. It was a very difficult power. And, you know, in the old days, if someone had that power, and I don't know her culture, but certainly I'm sure Eden researched all that and understood all that, but you would go to ceremony, you would be helped to be able to live with that power and to be able to use that power and to use that medicine for the community, for the people. And because of the fracturing of residential school and colonialism and so on, sometimes it's a bit harder. And, you know, and even the fact that in the book, you know, her family, her mother anyways, thinks that she's crazy because, you know, no one does this. No one observes this. This is not medicine. This is just, you know, psychosis. And so, so I think those were sort of things. So I thought we all have, so in a way, to me, what I wanted, rather than dealing a lot with the trauma, and I wanted to instead deal with the idea that she has this medicine and she has to come to terms with that medicine. And I wanted, you know, particularly young Indigenous people, but young Indigenous women, to see that film and say, oh, I can find my medicine. I can find my power. I can embrace it and take it into myself. She goes to the land of the dead. She literally goes to the land of the dead. She literally tries to go save someone. And she literally has to encounter these things. And she comes back. And I remember, you know, you read things and, you know, over the years about the misnomer shaman, but, you know, medicine people, whatever. And one of their journeys is to go to beyond this earth, beyond this land, to the spirit world, and to be able to come back. And so the fact that she could go and come back, to me, was a great power. And I really wanted to kind of make that sort of central to the film so that other people could feel that as well and take that with them.
I remember sitting with the late Woody Morrison, and I said, hey, did you see Loretta's Monkey Beach? And he said to me, oh, she did it. She combined our oral traditions with the film, with the visuals of film. And he was really excited, you know, about seeing that, of course, because it's, you know, his relationality to those territories as well. We don't have a lot of time.
Before we, funny, he also wrote a little review on his Facebook. And he said, because I was also giving tickets out to everybody. So, you know, and so I said, hey, you want to go with Linda to go see? Oh, okay. Oh, wow. Okay. So go. And he wrote, and he says, you know, at first I thought this was awfully slow. And then he said, but then I realized that this was being told in the Indigenous way. And, you know, I thought it really sort of broke my heart. And then I remember the same thing when I made the film. The people go on with the Kainai people from Southern Alberta. I showed it at Calgary Film Festival, and one of the counselors came up from Kainai to see the film. And I remember him saying, you know, there's a lot of films about Blackfoot. There's so many films about Blackfoot, but he says, this is the first one that made me feel good. And one of the elders who was in that film said to tell me, he said to, I think, Amethyst, he said, to tell Loretta to say she got it. And I'd like to think that part of that film in particular was also because there's so much medicine around their bundles. There's so much medicine around their practices that I could never begin to fathom because I've not participated. I'm not Blackfoot. I'm not from there. But I understand about energy. I understand about that power of energy and medicine. And there's things in that film that only our people get because it is about medicine and it is about that. And other people can experience it too. I mean, I'm not saying that, but there was so those sometimes take away from how you know, when, you know, get a bad review or something like that. It's like, no, the people believe in it, so that's more important.
Yes, absolutely. This is just one of my last questions before I open it up to all of you here to ask Loretta some questions. But this is my last question, how has the industry changed in recognizing Indigenous storytelling recognizing and showcasing the work of women, and gender diverse Indigenous people. Like, what can we as a community do to continue to grow and improve that? But basically, what's happened? What's changed? What was it that you experienced and where you are today that got you here?
I don't know. I think there's more. I think Indigenous Screen Office has made a big change. I mean, without the Indigenous Screen Office, I don't think what's happening now would be happening. It's been really critical, and hands up to Jesse Wente and all the people who worked so hard to get it there, and then all the people who are there now, like Carrie Swanson and Christy Asu and Isabel, and I'm sure I'm leaving people out because they're an amazing group of people who work there. I think APTN made a big difference. I mean, I couldn't have done children's series. I couldn't, CBC, no way CBC was going to let, because my first children's series was Nahiwaitan, which basically was teaching 5, 6-year-olds like basic Cree, and at the same time having fun in the city. So, going on canoe, going to Kaya tours, and because it was set in Vancouver, like you can be Cree or Métis in the city of not your territory. You can observe it and you respect it, but at the same time, you can go to say good things, because again, that was growing up in Edmonton, it was a very racist community. There was things that we didn't feel we could go to because that's just for white kids, or that's you have to be this or you have to be that, or you don't feel safe there. So I wanted kids to feel safe, like they could go to the rock climbing place, or they could go to Science World, or they could do and they could speak their language in the city and not be afraid. And they can make TV, they can be on TV, So CBC, I don't think would have ever seen that. Like, I don't think CBC, well, why would you want to teach Cree to little, like, why, and then also maybe they're doing that now. I know they did a lot of great things with CBC North. I know CBC North, which was an initiative that, has a lot of language in it. So it's not to say not, wasn't possible. Then Coyote Science, same thing with Coyote Science. When I started Coyote Science, even though now we've got, braiding sweetgrass, now we've got people talking about Indigenous science, bringing it into the mainstream of science. Even Leroy Little Bear and Dr. Lorna Williams, who were both a couple of my heroes, my inspiration for making Coyote Science, they tried for years to get Indigenous science in the curriculum. And they were always told, well, that's just folk medicine. Oh, that's just old wives' tales. That's not real science. And so now you're seeing that, no, those are changes. But when I started Coyote Science, which is, again, like, I don't know, not 15, but 12 years ago, 10, 12 years ago, I guess, that still was the case, right? But so if it wasn't for APTN, I could never make Coyote Science. So those things have certainly changed. That those opportunities have been given to our people, by our people, because ISO was created by Indigenous people. APTN was created by Indigenous people, like Rosemary Kaptana, who's one of my heroes, and George Henry, who's gone now, and there was Isaac, I can't remember the other fellow who was Inuit, Dene maybe, and many other people. It wasn't just those three, but I remember them speaking at the CRTC when they were first trying to bring APTN to get licensed. So those things have changed. They certainly have changed. What I do worry about is there's an elitism, and that I think reflects the way the mainstream industry has always operated, where it's not necessarily what you know or what you can do, but it's who you know. And I think that's still very prevalent. And everything I do, I counter that, which sometimes has been at my own career, sort of advancement caress, but hey, that's life. But I do think that there's been, a lot of really good things, and certainly there's been so many more filmmakers, so many storytellers. What I really like to do, and this goes way back, and this goes back to our discussions back in the day, was that there is every Indigenous community should have the tools to be able to tell their own story, and bring that. Some of them might just stay in the community because they're only meant to stay in the community, and other could be brought to the world, so that we do have this community of professional filmmakers and professional crew and everything else. But I think that particularly with the new tools that, you can make a virtual film at home, and you're using a lot of, you still need the means to do it. It's not like, oh, now you can just go use your iPhone and make a film. It's not that. I think it should be made into like a people should be paid. It should be a job, just like, the band manager, or, like that. There should be within every community, like a communications or a storytelling community group who can kind of help make the films, record all those stories. And they were done. People tried it in the past. I mean, as you know, there's thousands of tapes out there, on VHS and even reel to reel and beta and that, who needs to be digitized, because this, people took cameras and recorded elders and, did those things. And I think we need to kind of take that to the next level. Like, what does that look like? How does that how does that work? How can we make that sort of more integrated into the everyday of Indigenous lives? But yeah, things have definitely gotten better.
No, absolutely. And in their relationships, not only to their communities, but to the larger context of having to tell stories necessary for their relationship to the lands and the waters.
Yeah.
Thank you, Loretta. I just wanted to open it up, and I don't know, Anaïsa, if you want to sort of help facilitate this conversations and choose who might have some questions. So maybe just you'll know on the Facebook, there's a hand there, I think it is, who would like to ask if there's a question that you have.
Yeah, you can raise a virtual hand, or you can type a question into the chat here, and I can help pass that along if anyone has a question. There was a question earlier of where can Monkey Beach be watched, and Shasha said on CBC Gem. I don't know if there's anywhere else you want to plug, Loretta, for Monkey Beach.
I'm not even sure if it is still on CBC Gem. I'm not sure, and I don't know whether, Sasha, maybe you could update us on that.
Yeah, it's still on CBC Gem. It's also on Amazon Prime, and I could swear it was on Crave. I was going to watch it again last week, but I haven't been able to find it. I'm like looking around.
I think it had a limited number of years that it was on Crave, and I think I think that was the deal. So I don't know. I know APTN had it on Lumi, but I'm not sure. I haven't looked recently to see where it is. I've also, if people really want to see it, I will send a link. Just reach out to me through LinkedIn, and I'll send you a Vimeo link so you can watch it.
Cool.
Okay, awesome. So Loretta is on LinkedIn. That's the way to find Loretta. Other questions? Anyone have anything else they want to share? Impressions from what you heard today?
Well, I actually have a question. I've got lots of questions. And I guess one of them is that one of the first shows that I saw of yours, Loretta, and my question when I saw this was like, was on Today's a Good Day, Remembering Chief Dan George. And the fact that you had to go into the community, and this was in an interesting time that this came out. Maybe just talk a bit about what that story was, and in terms of the work of the late.
I know CBC was doing a series called, I think they were doing 1 hour or half hours about historic figures, important historic figures. And so I approached them about doing, first I approached Len. First I went to Len, and I knew Len for a long time. Len, when I was this, teenage runaway, and now I was a single mom, I went to volunteer at the Friendship Center, and Len was, of course, kind of a fixture at the Friendship Center. Len George, who was one of Chief Dan George's, I think his youngest son. And Len was just like welcoming to everybody, and he was very kind and welcoming. And so I felt, I felt welcome, and so then I went and worked, and when I went to film school, I went and worked with Len. He had the Chief Dan George Foundation, and right on at Tsawwaylitooth, we worked in a little trailer, and we did, Phil Lane Jr. was, Phil Lucas was alive then. And so Phil Lucas and Len were making films, and I was kind of like a production coordinator, I guess. Sort of, I would arrange locations and places like that. So I did a lot of stuff for them then. And so then, you know, Len and I also together created a training program at Cap College. It was one of the first. It was back in the early 90s or late 80s, I think. And I was still at film school by then. And that training program was a 1-year program. Unfortunately, we didn't get renewed, which was too bad. But at the time, people like Tracy Kimbono and the late Barb Cramner and you know, many other people took that course. And you know, working in industry in one way or the other. Joey Alec, I think, has been working in industry as you know, in the union for years. So there was a lot of different people who took that course. So again, Len and I had, you know, good friendship. And so when that program came out, I said to him, then I went to Len and I said, oh, would you be willing to, you know, I'd be honored if you let me tell your dad's story. So of course, he said, of course, you know, of course, he, you know, I'm sure he checked with his family, his brothers and sisters. But they all said, of course. So I was very lucky. But then I went to CBC. And CBC was like, even though I'd done Forgotten Warriors and I'd done, you know, all these films, I was like, oh, well, we don't know if you're ready to do that. Yeah, you know, you're going to have to get a producer to produce you. And it's like that. Okay, well, whatever, you know, I'm like, and then they only gave me, like, I think the budget was like 150,000, which is like, even then wasn't a lot of money. And so, but before they did that, before the first time I went to them, they said no. And then I said, which is the same they did with Monkey Beach. I went to Monkey Beach. I got 4 no's from CBC before they finally said yes. And the only reason they said yes, and then they didn't give me a huge license, is only because the executive producer, who was a friend, had worked at CBC, and he called them up and he got, you know, said, come on, you got to, you know, you got to support this. But it took, like I say, it took 4 no's before that. But I got a no first. And so finally I kind of mustered up my you know, fierceness. And I said, look, you're either going to do a story on Chieftain George or not. And if you do a story on Chieftain George, it's going to be me. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. And I was like, oh, okay. So, but one of the things that was really important for me is because having spent time with the family, they were so epic. They were such, you know, I mean, I know Amy is still, you know, very much alive and still so powerful. You know, she's out there, you know, time to warrior up. You know, you see her, I mean, she's so powerful. And of course, all the sons and daughters and grandsons and daughters and all the grandkids are all like amazing. Everybody just continues that. But they were so epic. So it was really important, even just physically how I presented them. I wanted them to be full body. I know, again, that back in the time, that was the late 90s, and you know, docs were still kind of like this. I wanted full body. I wanted people to see the epicness and the size and the force of them physically in their space. You know, I worked with I should remember him. You probably remember him. Indigenous cinematographer who then went to CBC to work in the news department. I can't remember his name right now. But anyways, so but yeah, it was great. And it was you know, it wasn't, again, a typical documentary. I had you know, James Nicholas kind of be Dan. You know, we had these little moments where, because you know, James remembers Dan, like, and I think it was even a story Len talked about. It's like when he was always traveling, because he was always going to another film, when he was working on so many films. And he was in his 80s or 70s by then. And he'd had a bad injury when he was a logger. He had basically broken his leg in about, I think, 2 or 3 locations. He had to drag himself down from the hills after that. So he always had a bit of a limp because it never really healed properly. And so when he would walk through the airport to go catch a plane to go off to the next film, there was always this kind of like very kind of iconic man, native man, you know, off to, you know, make a film, you know, a feature film, you know. And so I had James be that man, and he was also a gambler, And so we have, so there's little moments like that. And he was very, very, very attached to, you know, his wife, and how critical that was to their to that film. So to me, in the end, the film was really a love story between him and his wife, and also about with the family. And that's really what I wanted to tell. And I was lucky; I was able to interview Dustin Hoffman, who had great respect for him, and uh, the director of Little Big Man. Couldn't get Clint Eastwood though. Clint Eastwood just like I tried. I tried in many ways because of Outlaw Josie Wales, which I feature. Also had a problem with the company that owned Outlaw Josie Wales. Columbia was great, Little Big Man. They were just lovely, lovely, lovely. But in the end, the people who owned Outlaw Josie Wales treated me and the film quite badly, although they did give me permission, but they only gave me permission to show it in Canada and only for a limited run of 4 years. Whereas Columbia said, oh no, you have it for eternity anywhere in the world. And so there was definitely something going on. And Clint Eastwood was, it was impenetrable. I'm so happy to see that Native filmmaker Neil Diamond got an interview with him many years later, but I guess, probably gender might have had something to do with it. I did reach out to someone who was supposed to be an important manager of Clint Eastwood's life. And I'm sorry to have to say this, but I said, I'd like to interview him about, about why would he want to talk about that old man? So, that was that. But anyway, the rest was a good experience. The rest of it was good. We did a lot of good things in it. And I still, I'm very grateful that the family said yes.
Yeah, and it's a very timeless piece. I mean, going back to seeing it, it's something that really honors not only Chief Dan George's work, but of course the community's, continual, honoring of this man that had put their name, in the international circles. So we're at 2:00 now. So thank you so much, Loretta.
Renae, sorry, before we wrap up, we did have someone with their hand up for a second there. I don't know, Akila, if you still had a question. I don't know if you wanted to throw it in here.
Oh yeah. Hi Loretta. I met you at the Web Summit from the Navajo Nation. Yeah, I just had a quick question. I know we're a little bit short on time, so probably like a short answer might be good. But when dealing with like emerging technology, have you ever got any like backfire from like some Indigenous community members, maybe wondering if we should be going this direction with technology and incorporating our language and culture into it? And I just wonder, because I work on language and culture modernization through emerging technology too. And I just wonder, like, how do you approach that if that is ever given to you?
Well, it is, particularly with AI, which is a whole other discussion, because I think that's really critical. But I mean, going back to me, I've always been very careful. I've always tried to never show what people didn't want shown. And I've also always tried to make the camera, I've never, like, for instance, when I did the children's series, the first children's series, I didn't want to go to a powwow with a bunch of cameras and crew kind of getting in everybody's faces. So instead, I was lucky, Kat Norris, the late Kat Norris, who's a lovely woman who knew so much more about powwow than I did, even though she's a West Coast person. But I said to her, can you help me put on a powwow? So then we can film the powwow and we can get all the people who want to be there, and we'll treat it like a powwow. Everybody will we'll have an MC, we'll have Woody came, actually. Woody came as one of the veterans to bring out, the grand entry. So we did all that so that way I wasn't kind of like trying to, just be that annoying documentary filmmaker trying to get in everybody's face and, make the film, it was all about the film, when really it's about the people's experience and the people's moment. As language, we would go back to the day when we had those first meetings, drum beats to drum bites. Those were discussions, and there were artists who said, listen, I want nothing to do with this. I don't want my art out there in the world because it will be duplicated, it will be exploited, it will, you know, I'll lose my, you know, control over my imagery and my story and my culture. And so, you know, we had that discussion. I'm not saying we were able to take it into any kind of policy decisions about what we should do as Indigenous people with respect to these technologies. Um, I've never filmed ceremony and I wouldn't. But I try to do the thing about, again, it's like it's energy. So I may not do ceremony, but what is the energy of love and kindness and the things that kind of like surround some of those energies, ceremonies, and sort of try to bring that into play. There have been, I know, I remember when I did my first children's series about the language, I did approach the late Larry Lowy, who's an elder, pre-elder, who had tried to teach me and a few other people, but you know, some learned. Actually, George Littlechild, the great artist, he learned starting with classes with Larry Lowy. And I went to Larry and I said, what should I do? Because in the case of Cree, there's like at least 6 dialects, and probably if you went deeper, there's even more dialects. And I said, you know, first of all, like, should I be doing this? And then he said, yes, because this is just another way of us being. It's again, it's like, it's energy. It's this 2D space. It's television. What's on APTN, that helps. It's an Aboriginal People's Television Network, so it's not like going, you know, to just any place. It's going to our people. And he said, it's still energy. It's not like we're doing something that we wouldn't have done already. We're teaching, we're sharing, we're taking kids and having fun. And then I said, well, what dialect do I use? Because there's so many dialects. And he said, well, because I was kind of casting out, looking for Cree speakers to be the teacher. And he said, well, whoever you think is the best teacher, whoever, use her dialect or their dialect. And that's what I did. But yeah, no, it's certainly, you know, it's a challenge, and it's certainly things, you know, people have talked about. You know, that's the weird thing, that's the strange thing about Unreal, because you can create your own world in Unreal, right? So then there should be certain boundaries, like what happens. And I'm gonna tell a quick story. I won't say too much about this because it's not my story, but he shared it, so I think I can tell it. Somebody made a film, and in the film, he filmed a sweat, and he filmed the outside of the making of it, and I think they filmed some of it inside. And later on, this person went to a sweat with some elders, and he said he realized when he was in there that this was a scolding sweat because it was so hot and it went on for so long. The rounds went on and on and on. So he said, no, I guess I have to endure this because they're mad at me because I put a sweat on the film and I shouldn't have done that. So that's what they're doing. They're giving me teaching, and that's, so I didn't do it again. So anyways, it was all over, it was done. And he went and said, oh, I see what you're doing. I see that you were giving me a scolding sweat, that this was because I shouldn't have put that in the film. And they said, no, we figured that you had talked to an elder and an elder had given you permission to do that. So that was, you know, not for us to say. He said, the reason why we did that, because this film happened to be about people who had committed criminal offenses. And he said one of the persons in there had said that the alcohol, he had done his crime with it when he was out drinking, and that was, he said that's, well, not, you know, it was the alcohol spirit who did it. And the elder said, no, it was that man who did it. And so he had to take responsibility for it. And because you were saying that gave that person an out, if you like. And we wanted to give you that teaching that wasn't a way of doing it, because people have to be responsible for themselves. And yes, they have to heal, but they have to take responsibility for themselves. So I think, so there's, yeah, I mean, I think there's just so many ways that non-Indigenous filmmakers don't have to navigate these things. They don't have to, you know, think about that, because there's been so much exploitation of our culture. There's been so much appropriation of our culture. Non-Native people can walk away. They don't have to take the consequences of the responsibilities. I mean, I've done things where I probably am sorry, like I've forgot to give credit to somebody once who sang a song, and that to this day it still breaks my heart. I mean, those so many things that you know, we deal with that other filmmakers don't. So I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, I think I think there's room for bigger discussions, and I think particularly with AI, and I'd love to kind of continue that, because that's something that even though you know, I mean, I know that if AI can, because it's just basically a language learning, it's big, what do they call it? Large language, you know, models, whatever. There's really no AI right now. There's really no artificial intelligence. It's all just large language kind of like machines, if you like. Is that it has potential. It's almost like I've known friends who were sick and had to take Western medicine, and they smudged the medicine and they did ceremony with the medicine, and they were like, okay, I've made it indigenous. So if we're doing AI for language, for instance, it can be contained. It doesn't have to go out into the world. It doesn't have to be part of any other network except the network that, you know, like there's a Maori guy who created, I think I may mention this to you, a Maori guy who's recorded 30 years of radio programs in Maori with Maori speakers and elders and knowledge holders. And he's used that language with permission of all the elders in his village to teach the computer to speak Maori. Now, it doesn't go anywhere beyond that village. It doesn't go out into the world, but it's something that he is using within the context of his community, so that when those elders go and, you know, that knowledge is there, it's accessible, and like, how do you program that? So there's a lot of consideration. And then I know other people, you know, there's a site that I go to called Cree Word of the Day, and there's been a lot of threads about no, our language is sacred. It should nowhere be attached to any of these computers. It shouldn't be there in any way. So, you know, there's a big discussion for us to have, for sure. So I hope that helped a little bit, but I'd love to continue the conversation.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for the questions. And thank you, and Loretta Todd, for sharing your journey. I could be here for another couple hours. It's unfortunate it's only for an hour. So thank you all for joining us today for that. And I'm just going to pass it to Anna-Isa. And thank you for creating this opportunity for us to have this dialogue with Loretta. Hi.
Yeah, thank you both so much. That was really, really amazing. And thanks to everyone for joining today. A reminder that it is currently Indigenous Futures Month, and so we're especially honored to have been in conversation with such a strong champion of Indigenous futures today. You can help me spread the word that GEMS can and does waive program submission fees, festival admission, submission fees to any and all Indigenous creatives. So as long as they fit our eligibility criteria otherwise. So if you know someone who has a film that may belong in our festival, you can send them our way and we will waive submission fees to all Indigenous creatives identifying as women or gender diverse. June 21st is also Indigenous Peoples Day, and we will be sharing some resources on how you can get involved in support of advocacy efforts led by Indigenous community members, such as advocacy efforts in support of missing and murdered Indigenous women, Every Child Matters, Land Back, and other movements. And I will leave you with a personal ask, which is please go out of your way to watch Indigenous films, show up to premiere screenings, remind our funding bodies that we want to see Indigenous stories on screens and in any and all media formats. We as consumers have the power to help remind any and all funders and government entities of what we want to see by consuming the content. So go watch Monkey Beach, that's your homework, and any and all other Indigenous films. Loretta, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd just like to say a little shout out to Sasha MacArthur, who helped make this happen, because she brought me forward as a possible speaker. Sasha works at the IM4 Lab and worked on my other projects, so certainly couldn't be here today without Sasha. And also Robin Weaselbear. Robin was, I think, still there. Maybe she's still on. Robin Rieselbeer is also works at the IM4 Lab and has worked on Coyote Science and Monkey Beach. So shout out to them as well. And I do see that there's been Fred Thorson, who worked on Monkey Beach. So just doing a shout out to him. And I'm hoping I'm not leaving anybody else out that has worked with me. And Renae works with us all the time at IM4 Lab. She was one of our teachers we were working with a group of in Yellowknife, a group of Indigenous women in Yellowknife, and Renae came in as one of our teachers or short script writers. So it's, and I'd like to say a little, I see Michelle Pierre's here, who comes to we're doing a mural. IM4 Lab is doing a mural with Indigenous youth and elders, and Michelle's been showing up, and of course she's been a leader for a long time in the Indigenous community. And then also just gems like really value. And I'm going to say it's because I have a niece called Anissa. So you're
Anaisa.
Anissa. So
yeah.
Thank you for Anna for making this possible and for all the good work you do at GEMS. I love the name GEMS. So it's a beautiful way of reinterpreting women in film. And yeah, so thank you. And I hope I haven't left anybody out. But oh yeah, Julian, our marketing guy, and so just and has helped kind of revise our website for sure, for one thing. So shout out to Julian for being here as well. So and everybody else back at IM4 Lab. I know Davis and our interns. We've got some great interns, and everybody at DigiBC. We wouldn't be able to be doing what we're doing at the IM4 Lab if it wasn't for DigiBC and VIVO. But certainly DigiBC is a big supporter of IM4 Lab, and you know, I'll go back to the beginning, which was also Emily Carr. Emily Carr was an important part of the process as well. So thanks to everybody, and do take care. And I see someone wanted to. I said maybe someone was also from similar family background as me, so please reach out. But I'm happy to yeah, I'm happy to take any follow-up people might have. And yeah, and Coyote Science is on Saturday, Sunday mornings on CBC. I mean on APTN, not on their HD. They put all their kids channels on their SD channel for some reason, even though often I shoot in 4K. But nonetheless, it's all their children's programming, which is a lot more. So if you have kids or grandkids or friends and that, there's a lot of great kids programming on APTN Saturday and Sunday mornings, and that's where you'll find APTN. I mean, that's where you'll find Coyote Science. So
okay, amazing. Thanks, Loretta. Thanks, everybody. Wishing you all a wonderful week and stay connected. It sounds like such a beautiful community in this space. So hope you all manage to stay in touch outside of this space, and we'll see you all at the next Real Talk.
okay, so
Bye,
take
everyone.
care. Bye.